Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Larry Yeager-Purcell, and I'm very excited to welcome you all here today. We have a wonderful webinar by two fantastic colleagues. I'm going to introduce today Marsley Kehoe, who's an independent scholar, PhD in Dutch art and a member of the Board of Historians of Netherlandish Art, and Carrie Anderson, PhD, who is Associate Professor of Art History at Middlebury College and joining us from a farm outside today. And Marsley and Carrie are going to be speaking to us about a collaborative, ongoing, fantastic project, the Dutch Textile Trade Project, which recently debuted with a special issue of the Historians of Netherlandish Art. They're going to be talking about both the website and the project itself, which deals with the circulation of globally sourced textiles, but also actually the kind of combination of the issue of the digital journal, which debuted recently. Also, just before I go any further, a quick few reminders. That we are recording this webinar, so please everyone be aware of that. And if you haven't already, please do sign up for the email mailing list that we have, and also our YouTube channel where these recordings will be available in due course. Mute yourselves until we have the Q&A. Marsley and Carrie will be diving in with their presentation for the first 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions from all of you. Have I forgotten anything? Good. Okay, then I will pass it over to you, Marsley.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen here. All right, are we all in presenter view? I'm going to be swapping between our slideshow and then our website, so I'm hoping that won't be too awkward. I'm going to get started kind of giving a brief overview of the project, and then Carrie and I are each going to describe one case study that we think illustrates some of the potentials of the tools we've built and also some of the challenges of what we're bringing together in this project. And then we'll talk about kind of technical aspects at the end. The Dutch Textile Trade Project examines the movement of textiles as cargo on Dutch ships in the 17th and 18th centuries. Carrie and I started this project in 2018, and then we just launched in March. So it's already been quite a long time. So we have this new website that we'll be looking at shortly, and also the issue of Journal of Historians of Netherlandish Art that Lara mentioned. That issue includes a long form essay where we kind of describe the entire project and illustrate some of our initial findings. And then it also has a series of short essays written by textile historians, digital humanists, kind of either digging into the project data or looking at bigger digital art history issues that kind of surround it. There's two major pieces to this project, which are featured on the website, which I know I'm just giving you a little hint of right here. One is the visual textile glossary, which is really what kind of organizes the site for the user. And other than that, we have our open access data set with two data visualization apps to help make your way through it. With our initial launch, what we're providing is 25 years of textile shipment data from 1700 to 1724. And then, let's see, that's of a planned about 200 years. So we're an eighth of the way through. And then we have 10 initial visual glossary entries, which we're planning to expand as we go. Our aim overall is to unite 4 different types of data, which I have kind of spread out here on this slide. Material data, so that's I don't know how good the quality of the image is there, but that's a detail of a swatch there. Visual data, so images of people using textiles. Textual or archival data, so information that we're eventually drawing from to create the 4th kind of data there, which is the quantitative and qualitative data that we can visualize through our data set. As art historians, our kind of most comfortable area is the visual information, which provides us a lot of context for how textiles are used, but also has to be interpreted cautiously, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We've also been leveling up our skills in textile knowledge since we've been working on this project. So Carrie's at a weaving workshop right now. And we've been kind of developing our knowledge of textiles as we go, and also consulting with textile historians as well. There's many examples of textiles in museums that we're drawing from, but also from archival examples, so pieces of textile pasted into documents, which have been really helpful for kind of spreading out the story of what kind of textiles are moving on these ships. Our project goal, kind of overall at this point, is to develop a scholarly resource that can be used by art historians, textile historians, economic historians, and others so that they can dig into this complicated world of textiles. The information we're drawing from is documents like this, which is a cargo list of, actually I've got a few versions of it here. This is a general cargo list that was published as a broadsheet that says it's the contents of 9 ships that came from the East Indies, from Batavia, which is now Jakarta. It just gives the dates and then says when it arrived in the Netherlands. Of all of the items that are listed on this cargo list, everything in the blue boxes is a textile. So you can see that it's more than half of the items that are moving on these ships. But then part of the problem that we've come across and that we're hoping to partially solve is that many of these textile terms are obsolete or their meaning has changed over time. So here's a couple translated, and dongris here is the one I'm going to be talking about in a moment here. All of this information has been kind of gathered together into a data set that has, I think, 22,000 entries in it of each of these, for example, 8,000 pounds of Chinese silk. So lots of lines of data that are queryable through the apps that Carrie's students have built. So I want to feature this term dongris, which is a term that I presume that many of us have never heard. It's a cognate of the term dungarees, basically overalls or pants. So we might have heard of it in that term. And it's possible that the connection between the words is that this textile was used to make that item at some point. There's some secondary information about this textile dongris, which describes it as utilitarian, as something that could be used for clothing, for sales, for packaging. It describes, these sources describe this textile as often dyed blue or brown. And then there's a discussion of the weave structure of this textile. So we have one sample here on the screen that shows an example of dongris, here spelled dungaree, but it's from 150 years later than our data set. So that distance makes it a little bit challenging to interpret, but we can already see that it's not blue or brown. If we looked closely at this, which I know we can on a screen, we would see that it's plain weave. It's not anything strange or different like the secondary sources provide us. So even just kind of digging into some of the pieces of data that we're working with in this project, we're already seeing that some of the secondary literature is either confusing or not quite applicable. And, this makes sense. There's, 400 years of textile history going back to the beginning of our project, in which textiles change, terminologies change. So there's a lot of change that could happen that explains some of this variation in interpretation. I know you can't see too well on the maps here, but this also gives us a little bit of information about this textile. These are maps produced from our apps, and they also show us kind of a different story than what we've been reading in the secondary literature about this textile. So most of the dongris that the Dutch East India Company is importing is coming from the Coromandel coast and other parts of the east coast of India and what's now Bangladesh. But the city of Dongri is right about here. So it's not in any of those areas. So there's already something a little bit kind of interesting happening there. If the city of Dongri is meant to be connected to this textile, it doesn't apply to our data. And then this textile moves from India through the Dutch East India capital at Jakarta and to the Dutch Republic, which is up here in red. Interestingly, it doesn't move into the Atlantic trade, at least so far in our research. So there's a lot of questions that are left there. This makes us kind of look a little bit deeper into one thing we do know about Dongris, which is that it is often listed in cargoes as for packing. So here is, I mean, this is in Old Dutch, but it's tote afpakking, and here transcribed for packing. This is one of the few textiles of the about 400 in our data set that is given a actual function in these kind of short cursory lists. So digging a little bit further into that, it's often used as packaging as part of a big gift. So gift exchange, which is Carrie's specialty, is something that's part of kind of developing trade relationships, especially in the East Indies where this was happening. And so there might be a huge gift worth thousands of guilders, many different textiles. In this case, we're just seeing a little snippet of a gift that went to Sumatra to 13 different individuals, and it was all different kinds of textiles and then Chinese porcelains, followed by 2 pieces of dongris for packing. So the dongris doesn't seem to be part of the gift necessarily, but it is kind of listed and included in the kind of economic description of the movement of textiles. So this leads us to the visual kind of information, and to an example like this that is a Dutch image of a Chinese gift, or a gift to China. So we see Dutch East India Company officials in the foreground bringing piles of gifts to this throne at the front. And I like to imagine that we can interpret the kind of plain light colored cloth that's wrapping around some of these gifts as perhaps dongris. So this one in the foreground that kind of looks like a marshmallow with some strings around it, a soft textile gift wrapped with dongris to protect it from the elements and kind of present it in a attractive way. So this might be a way of kind of understanding what dongris could look like in context. But again, visual data can be problematic. The author of this book never went to China. Neither did his illustrators, so he never observed this actual event. But these were early modern people who saw goods moving, so there might be some knowledge in there. I'm going to show you briefly what this looks like on our website. Let's see. All right, are you seeing the white background website now? Okay, nodding, thank you. So this is our textile glossary. If we go to the dongris entry, we are presented with 2 paired images. So making sure that the visual and the material data is up front. These are interactive pieces of visuals, so they have kind of hotspots on them that have more information. You can also zoom in and out on these, so they're really kind of dynamic and active. This is then followed by a short definition that is consistent with the other information we've been able to find through research, which is connected to the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, which I should say, since many of these terms are obsolete, they're not in the AAT. So a lot of these we are pushing out to the Getty as they're becoming available. We follow this with some more vocabulary-based things, so name variants with more information if we can give them, related textiles, which we expect to grow as we have more textiles in the glossary. Sailcloth has an entry, so it's a hyperlink. Below that, this is your first view of the apps that Carrie's students have built, which allows you to query the data. So I mentioned before that the secondary data describes these as blue or brown. We only have red natural, which is like an undyed color, or white. So in our data, we don't even have those colors that the secondary information included. But we can see this packaging data. So the ones listed as packaging related are just these few little blue ones here. many of the other examples could have also been used for packaging, but it didn't mention it there. You can change things around here, like the origin, and maybe the average price for a piece of dongress coming from that place. The most expensive being this Coromandel Coast packaging dongress. So you can really kind of dig in there, and you can also download all the dongress data if you want to, or the complete data set from the app here. Below that is a medium length essay that kind of shows our deeper engagement with the textile. So looking at where it appears in our data, what some of the additional secondary information might be, and providing more context. And then that's heavily footnoted. And that's followed by a gallery of images. So the two images that you saw above, but then also some other related images are provided here as well. So this is kind of the format of each of our visual textile glossary entries. And I'm going to throw it over to Carrie here and switch back to the PowerPoint. Hopefully Carrie's got good audio.
Hopefully, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, there are no mooing cows in the background. Yes, but they're here. I'm going to, what I wanted to do is take this from kind of a different angle. As Marcely and I spent so much time sort of transcribing and translating and aggregating these data, seeing them in aggregated form and being able to search through these web applications have led to certain conclusions or questions, I should say. And this is, I guess, what I really want to emphasize is that we've never really seen, these data and these applications as a way of answering questions necessarily, but generating more research questions. And that, I think, has been the most fun for us, is kind of seeing all these data together and thinking, oh, well, look at these interesting patterns that we can see from a distance that we couldn't really see close up. So I wanted to start, these are 3 pie charts that are generated from our, excuse me, our map application, where you can sort of see things in geographical space, but then kind of dig down a little deeper to see how different textiles are shipped to different geographical regions, and then see how the textiles are distributed differently over those geographic regions. And so I've kind of pieced together 3 pie charts here. I focus mostly on the sort of so-called Dutch Atlantic. And so what you can see here, I'm sure it's hard to make out all these different terms below, but these are charts that represent the textiles sent to Ghana, Benin, and Angola during the 25-year period of our data. And what was initially really striking to me was seeing these enormous yellow sections, mostly in Ghana and Benin, that are essentially what the Dutch referred to as slaaplakens, which are sheets. And secondary sources will say that they're used sheets, old sheets, although we don't often see that in the actual data, which is interesting. But so seeing this big segment of sheets being shipped to West Africa, for me, generated some questions. Why are sheets, either used or not, in such large, by the hundreds of thousands, being shipped to West Africa? So this generated a question for me to dig a little bit deeper into. So first, Marcely, I was trying to change the slide myself. Thank you. So first, I mean, one of the things that we can easily see from our data is just the average price. And for slaaplakens, it's really pretty consistent over the course of the 25-year period. They're generally between sort of 14 and 22 stoufers per sheet. And there's not a ton of variation, and actually mostly it's about between 17 and 18 stoufers. Could you go to the next slide, please? And so this data is all easily available in the manuscript. The West India Company archives are all still in manuscript form, which definitely makes it a little more challenging sometimes, but we have a wonderful postdoc, and hopefully we'll be hiring another soon, who's helped us with all of these transcriptions and translations, because it's quite a bit. But you can see up here in the detail, we have slaaplakens in yellow there for 17.5 stoufers per piece, and then it'll give you totals. So that is all easily aggregated, and we can see sort of average price per year. Again, there's not a lot of fluctuation in the price. There's also not a lot of, almost always, it just says sloplocken. So there's no modifier. So we saw how Marsley's Dongris had lots of different modifiers having to do with geography, a couple different colors, etc. Not much, but with sloplockens, there's almost never any modifier. Only occasionally will we see, I think we have 3 instances in which it's described by, it says printed. I think 1 or 2 instances, it says old, and we have a couple that say big, but for the most part, it just says sloplockens, and that is it. Could you switch to the next slide, please? So what I've kind of been assuming is that most sloplockens are just looking like we would imagine linen sheets to look. Here's an example, an English example from the V&A of a linen sheet, actually 2 that are sewn together with bobbin lace. So this is kind of what we're picturing is being shipped. Next slide, please. But what became really interesting to me after I started to look into Dutch sheets is that I noticed, and I had noticed this when I was transcribing it as well, is that the merchant's name is always listed before the commodity. And here we see 2 women who were named, Johanna van de Groenewal and Maria Joliet. And so this is not an isolated incident. So what I started to see is that it's almost always women who are supplying the West India Company with sloplockens, which suggests a sort of interesting pattern because it's not like this with any other textile that I've seen. Next slide, please. So when I actually downloaded our nice clean data set from our website, and I used the full data set, and I actually created a new category, which was the gender of each of the merchants. So then, and I used, I think, just Tableau to generate this very simple bar chart with that new data. So this is something else that I think is fun and exciting about our website. I said, you can take our data and do whatever you want to do with it. And so I added this other gender category, and you can see that of all the hundreds of thousands of sloplockens that were shipped to West Africa, 300,000, by far the majority of them were provided by women merchants. And in fact, it's really even more than that if you look at the purple and the pink categories there. These are, men and women teams or women and women teams. So again, this isn't really answering any questions, but now I have a whole new bunch of questions that I have about sloplockens, right? I mean, we're not talking about a woman who's just getting rid of her old sheets. This is an enormous business that requires quite a bit of organization to get hundreds and thousands of sloplockens to the West India Company. Next slide, please. Sorry, we've got a breeze here. I hope you can still hear me okay. And then on top of that, you start to see the same names over and over again. So this woman, Maria Joliet, seems to have had some kind of a contract or something with the West India Company, because you see her sort of over and over again providing sloplockens to the company. So in any event, again, these are just some of the questions that these data and this research have generated, certainly not answers. I mean, this is the beginning of an article on sloplockens and linen, but this is also just one side of it. So what I went into, asking about sloplockens is how are they used in West Africa? This was really my big question before I got kind of distracted by the women merchants. So if you go to the next slide, Marsley. We do find, and of course we have to be cautious, as Marsley said, there are secondary sources, especially Peter de Marais, who writes a book on the description, historical account of the Gold Coast in 1602, so definitely earlier than our data, but he talks about linen quite frequently, not sheets in particular, but linen. Next slide, please. And in one instance, in looking at this image of a market, he describes this figure L, and he says, Holland linen, which they have brought ashore from a ship lying opposite their quarter, is measured out in fathoms and remeasured. After measuring out 2 fathoms of linen, they cut the cloth into strips, which are only about the width of one hand, and use these instead of girdles around their body. The the fact that they cut these linens into strips is perhaps an approximation of a West African strip loom too, right? So maybe there's an effort to sort of transform a European-made textile into one that was suitable for purposes in West Africa, perhaps, right? I mean, again, this is the beginning. These are research questions, not answers. And then if you go to the next slide, Marcy. Oh, I guess it's not there. I didn't include it. There's one other image he has. Actually, there are a couple images in his text where he shows figures wearing garments that are described, again, by De Marais, who's a Dutch officer in the West India Company, described by him as being made of linen. Perhaps these linen sheets, perhaps not, because there are other forms of linen that are being shipped, certainly. So again, there are lots of ways that you can kind of take these data and these images and these essays. One of the advantages of publishing online, of course, is that we can make adjustments as we learn more and as we add data. So we have these 25 years so far, but the plan is to spread that out, hopefully to the full 200. Obviously, there'll be lots of holes given archival documents and what's available, but we're also hoping to move not away from the West India, but add on the Middelburg Company, which sort of takes over in the case of the Dutch West India Dutch Atlantic after 1720. So maybe I'll leave my Slaaplakens example case study there, and Marcy, we want to switch over to kind of talking more generally about. Is that what we're going to do next? Or maybe. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, let me update my screen. I'm just seeing black right now, so it's loading. There we go. So I thought we could kind of talk very briefly about the kind of technical aspects of the website. Let's see, it's a relatively simple website structure, which was by design. Our aim was to create a visually engaging but not overwhelming website that was something that we as digital humanists were capable of running mostly on our own, but also we worked with a project manager and a web designer to help get it to this state. So it's based off of a WordPress structure, and then somewhat adjusted for the sake of our project. It then let's see, our data set's built in Excel, so that's also kind of basic technology that we're all familiar with. And then I think bells and whistles of the website come from the apps that Carrie's students built using the R programming language. And I'm gonna let Carrie talk about that.
Yeah, so at Middlebury College, they have this winter term, 4-week term, and I was asked to participate in this new class. This was, it was the first pandemic winter term, so it was winter term 2021. I've now taught it twice, but essentially students, the class was about, I think, 60 people, and in the morning there were 2 sessions. There was a morning session where the whole class would learn the programming language R, and in the afternoon session they would apply what they learned to discipline-specific data sets. So when I taught the class, I was teaching it with, a Japanese linguist, a biologist, an economist, and someone else. But so the 4 of us would teach these afternoon sections where students were working with our data, and my students were working with our textile data, which was, at this point, the project was, I would say, maybe in its infancy. We had 5 years of data. It was incredibly messy, which I didn't realize until the students started playing around with it, and they would see duplicate spellings and all, it was a wonderful way to clean up our data set. And then they were able to do really amazing things with it. So we started off with some basic visualizations of the data, trying to detect patterns, different trade patterns. And then they built these interactive, the first iteration of these interactive web applications, which then I worked with individual students over the past few years to refine into what we have on the website now. So it was a really, it was an amazing experience. I mean, for me to learn a little bit of programming, but also to see what the students could do, who are much better at the programming than I am, but really helped us to develop this project in an exciting direction. And also for users, I mean, the idea is, you know, we're writing these visual glossary entries, but people will find different things from the data. And so we're hoping that when they do, they'll contact us and reach out. But the idea is for other people to be able to use our data in a way that helps their own textile related research questions.
I think we also wanted to talk a little bit about how here we're kind of building a digital collection around each of these textile terms, which then brings in imagery and information from a lot of different locations. So one of our first interests was in building a IIIF compatible viewer for the objects that we're bringing in, so that they could be high quality and hosted locally if possible. We haven't yet taken too much of advantage of that, in large part because many of our let's see, what's a good example I can use? Many of our examples of actual material samples are small little pages pasted into an archival document. So like all of these little Nikonese items here, and down there in our glossary. So we have, or in our gallery. So we have them all down here, but they're actually very low res images taken out of archival photography. So it's something we haven't taken too much of advantage of yet, but since the idea was to bring in information from multiple different locations, that was part of the design. One of the issues that we've seen is that some of our documents and images are coming from quite small and maybe under-resourced locations or non-museum places that are not necessarily set up to be sharing digital images and hosting. So that's something for us to keep kind of building on as we go. I think the last kind of topic I had, and then I think we should probably just open it up, is about the journal issue, because part of where we got our initial funding to start really digging into this project was with a grant that we worked on with the Journal of Historians of Netherlandish Art. So the aim was that that grant would both kickstart our project, but also allow the journal to make adjustments or improvements to kind of give them more functionality for hosting digital projects. So early on in that discussion, the idea was floated to kind of develop our project in kind of small little modules that but then we hosted on the journal website. But as we got slowed down by the pandemic in some ways, we weren't able to do the research travel related to that grant right away. We ended up building up the data set and building out the apps as we couldn't travel and as we're all stuck at home, to such a point that we were able to secure additional funding from the Crest Foundation that allowed us to actually start the website. And then kind of retroactively, what ended up happening is the journal was able to build kind of little, I guess, frames for pieces of our website. So basically in the journal issue, you'll be able to get to our website through kind of frames that allow you into the apps and into the website itself. So that was probably a better long-term plan. But the journal was also able to use some of this funding to work on their vocabularies. So building off of what we're doing with the textile vocabulary, they were able to dig in further into the kind of keyword system that they use to connect articles to the larger web, and make sure that those keywords are now keyed into the Getty AAT and other relevant vocabularies. So it was a kind of good mutual project because we were able to make sure some improvements happen to the website at the same time as kind of hosting the information. I'm gonna leave it there and maybe stop my share. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's just an amazing project. And just, I know I've been spending time just exploring myself, and it's incredible kind of how rich it is, how much there is to find. questions, thoughts from all of you? Feel free to write in the chat or raise your hand. I guess one question, maybe just kind of kick us off, that I had, and you've addressed this in parts, but just in terms of it being open access and collaborative, when you both started working together on this, was that always kind of the end goal? Or was it actually just a set publication, whether in print or digital form? How you got from the beginning of it to where you are now?
Yeah, I think our intention from the beginning was to be as open as possible. In part from our experience as researchers, realizing how many great, repositories of information that people have in their laptops or, in a file drawer somewhere. We wanted to make sure that the data that we're putting together here would be available and useful for other people. And I think we want to make our apps open access as well. So we do have on the back burner a plan to start our GitHub.
Yeah, actually it's already happened. Yeah. It's all the code is up on GitHub. Thanks to my very smart students who did all that. Yeah, so it's up there.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would say just generally, collaboration is fun, right? It's really fun. So I think that it's having the opportunity to work with Marsley and with other people who've either contributed to the JHNA issue or, have helped with the development of the website, collaborating with students. It's really, I find it especially rewarding because oftentimes what we do is often sort of very siloed and isolated. So it's really wonderful to collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
Question from Lauren. How are you thinking about promotion or indexing of this project?
Twitter, if Twitter makes it past this year. But yeah, I think so. We're linked to the Getty AAT, so I think that should help long term for sure. Yeah, I guess we're, this is reminding me of things on my to-do list that I haven't gotten to yet. But thinking about how to kind of best connect with the people that would find this the most useful. I think it really helped to have that kind of joint launch with the journal because it kind of came out at the same time. So we got a lot of initial reactions from people that were really helpful. We also have a comment field, and we've gotten some really interesting questions from people that we don't know who they are yet. So they're excited to kind of use the site as a way to start building even a bigger network.
Just a little follow-up on that. Have you thought about things like DOIs or other sort of identifying numbers? And I don't think I saw any, but I was just curious if that kind of work is on your to-do list as well.
It probably should be.
So we honestly, were at one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, honestly, I just wonder about the applicability of that to various types of resources and whether that's the kind of thing you would look for in a resource in your field or how that just plays into your thinking.
Mm-hmm. We were working with a librarian at Middlebury College who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but this was a conversation we had just started having. So she's, specializes in sort of data management and organization. And so there were a lot of things that were cooking. And she's now left, but she has agreed to still work with us because she's not only a data science librarian, but is also really into textiles. So she's personally invested. So hopefully that, it's a really good, it's a great comment because we have to sort of think about having our data both, available on our website, but in repositories probably through the college as well.
So we have another question in the chat from Emily. If you could speak a little bit more about organizational structure going forward, about managing the initiative and who will be keeping it going.
Well, right now it's us.
The two of you.
Yeah. So we, I think we mentioned our previous postdoc who was working with us, who was part of our team, but has now since moved on, and we're looking for another postdoc. Both of these positions were funded by the Crest Digital Art History, two Crest Digital Art History grants. So that person will be part of the team as well. And then, as I mentioned, we're moving on to kind of another set of archives. So we're just expanding out temporarily. But the other element of our project, I mean, we see our project now as being important for scholars of textiles who have textile related interests. But we also want to we're trying to secure funding to create a sort of a series of short conversational smart history style videos about it's kind of object driven textiles in particular collections, right? So meeting with textile curators or meeting with historians of textiles, focusing on a particular object or idea or process, and creating a sort of short video that would also live on our website. So that's kind of what we're pushing towards. It's one of the reasons I'm here taking a course in historic. So I'm using like 18th century historic looms here to understand more about the process, but also to make connections with makers in the hopes that we can kind of include, weavers and dyers in these videos that we could then provide and share on our website, which will provide a kind of fuller picture of textile production and make it not just a place where people can retrieve our data and use our data, but also learn more about textile production.
Is there a way to, that I'm just thinking about sort of partnerships or collaborations with museums that, I'm thinking not only of those that have textile collections, that yes, of course, but also what might be just, someone's wearing in a painting, and kind of being able to have access to, whether on an iPad or something in the galleries, to your website, but even incorporating then, like you said, a sort of a short video. Have you ever, thought about what that might look like in a museum space?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcy. I think that'd be great, but
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcy.
It's so tough because the collections that we are working with are so spread out. And I think partly like in terms of kind of institutional connections, we started out with an aim of being independent of institutions because Carrie wasn't tenured yet, although she is now, and I'm nowhere. So so finding a way to thinking about not being institutionally connected as a way of being more sustainable. But yeah, I think now we could also think about being connected as a way of being more sustainable for the project. But yeah, how to kind of build out partnerships with collections that are particularly, I think, salient for these kind of projects. Because I think also, like in some cases, we spend a lot of time with the Rijksmuseum collection because we're Dutch specialists, but and because it's open and available. But the textiles that are in their paintings or objects might be in another location. So those would be other kind of partnerships to build. So there's also all of those image problems and opportunities too. So it's a lot, but I think a lot of potential.
Nice. Question from Greg. Is there anything you would do differently if you were starting the project today?
That's a great question. I'm a big proponent of trial and error. We learned so much through failing that I think it was all an important part of the process. For us, especially this being kind of our first major, we had each done kind of smaller digital projects before, but I would say this was our first major collaborative project. And I would say the thing that adjusted most probably from start to finish was the structure of the data set. We kept on kind of adding things or changing things, realizing that we wanted, like initially we didn't have that merchant category. And then as, I kept going through these, because Marsley doesn't have that data on the East India Company side of things. It's only on the West India Company side. And so I started thinking, no, we really do want this information. It could prove valuable. So we started to just capture more and more data. And I think maybe if from the beginning we were that expansive. It probably would have saved us some time rather than going back and adding later. But, you know, we learned a lot through the process. So,
And then we might have been so intimidated, we
yeah.
wouldn't have kept going. There was a great moment where Terry's students did their kind of final project for the class, and they did a Zoom where they showed what they could do with the data. And there was this kind of big relief that it was worth all of the hours to put it together.
Thank you both. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Maybe we're also just all wowed by what you've done.
If you've got any great textiles in your collections or images of textiles, please send them to us.
Yes, please.
One of our apps that's existing partly in our imagination and partly on some coding is a kind of swatch repository that would allow you to kind of dig through and because we have this is one of those repositories that's on a laptop. So currently not really very accessible, but hopefully soon to be made available through the site so that people can kind of dig in. I think you could probably tell from the two examples that we chose that we're really interested in these kind of lower impact textiles. There's so much great work that's already been done on chintz and kind of other beautiful textiles that moved on these networks, but we're really interested in the perhaps less beautiful, but maybe more meaningful in different contexts kind of textiles.
And just to emphasize, I think Marcy said this in the beginning as well, is this really started off as an art history project. And we were interested in trying to identify too, right? Because they're not textiles, they're paintings of textiles, and it's a completely different thing. But that's what really started this whole project. And so this idea of having an app where you can search through different swatches of textiles, we wanted to approach it through, you know, searching through different physical characteristics, right? So I'm looking for, I have a painting here where somebody's wearing a blue and white check textile, and I want to see if there are any contemporary matching textiles
We're losing Terry.
and then you could maybe search. I can move. Anyway, I was done. Am I better over here?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I was pretty much done. So
Thank you. Well, if no one has any other questions, I would just say thank you both so much. It was really wonderful to hear about everything kind of from start to finish and how it developed, and give us a little bit more insight into how things really came to be, and that it's ongoing. I think that's something that's really exciting to me too, that this is not a project which then is done and you're walking away from, but the sort of ongoing collaborative nature of it. So congratulations again.
thank you. And thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So for everyone else, thanks for joining us today. Our next meeting is August 22nd, again at noon Eastern as per usual. If you have thoughts, ideas, or suggestions for future presentations, please feel free to reach out to any of us on the steering committee, and we will be happy to chat with you about those. And I think that's everything, right? Great. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.